All right, Alexander, let's do a quick video on the news of the S-300s from the possible delivery of S-300s from Greece to Ukraine. This has angered the Russians, greatly angered the Russians. I say rightly so because, as the Russians pointed out, they've had multiple agreements with the Greeks, with the Greek government, that these S-300s are not to be given to other countries. Period. Full stop. End of story. And the Greeks are breaking agreements and contracts. But
Yes.
I said in a video the other day, agreements and contracts in the collective West seem to be meaningless nowadays. So, they don't seem to be honoring agreements and
No.
contracts so much. But anyway, this has infuriated the Russians. And I am positive that if these S-300s do get delivered to Ukraine, and if they just some context, if the deal is the S-300s go to Ukraine, and then the Greek government gets Patriots, that's the bargain that the U.S. has told the Mitsotakis government to put forth. I'm positive that if this does happen, then the Russians will retaliate against Greece in an asymmetric manner.
Yeah.
And I don't leave Cyprus out of the equation. And I don't for a minute think that Turkey is going to fit into this somehow, some way. That's my great fear, that somehow, some way, Turkey may actually capitalize on this or play a part in the retaliation towards Greece for doing this. That's extreme. It's an extreme position, but it's out there. It's we shouldn't ever forget that.
No.
There has been just a final note is the EU has tried unsuccessfully, as all of this is going on, to try and bridge the gaps and the disputes between Turkey and Greece as well. So I think the EU, they understood that this is going to anger the Russians. The Russians may. The Russians and the Turks, they may stir up some trouble for the Greeks.
Yeah.
And so I think the EU was trying to work on taking the Turkish piece of the puzzle out of the equation for the Russians and the leverage that they could exert. But it hasn't succeeded. I think the differences are just too great between Greece and Turkey. Anyway, that's the story.
I agree with every single point that you have made, but I want to just say this. I mean, for Greece, of all countries, to break agreements with the Russians and supply a Russian air defense system to Ukraine at a time when Ukraine is in a war with Russia is an act of utter, extraordinary folly. I mean, it is beyond reason that any Greek government would do this at this time. I mean, I cannot imagine anything that would anger the Russians more. It's not just a question of Greece breaching agreements. The Russians will see that as a huge act of betrayal by Greece. Bear in mind that the Russians have consistently supported the Greek position, say on Cyprus, even in Soviet times they did. So, I mean, the Russians will just be, they will be beside themselves with anger over this, and they will retaliate. I mean, they will retaliate, I'm sure, against the Greek shipping industry, for example, which is already, in problems because it is supposed it depended heavily on transporting Russian oil, and that might not be possible because Greece went along with the oil price cap idea. But all right, that will be a problem anyway. But the Russians might take action against that. But you're absolutely right. The big danger for Greece, and the one that should alarm any Greek politician, is that at a time when then Russia and Turkey are clearly going through a process of rapprochement, which they are. And that looks like there's a consensus now in Turkey which supports it. Even parties that oppose Erdogan are talking about supporting this line. Well, alienating Russia, which has historically been a friend of Greece, and which is a major restraining force on Turkey, seems to me to be the most reckless and stupid thing you could possibly do. I mean, if Turkey now starts to put pressure on Greece or on the Greek world over Cyprus, or even more seriously for Greece specifically over the Greek islands. And it has an angry Russia behind it, which it might do. Well, where does that leave Greece? I mean, this thing is it's just folly piled upon folly. I suspect most Greek people, by the way, are opposed to this thing. If the political class goes down this route, which they show every sign of doing it, well, I can say once and for all that they're not acting in the interests of Greece, and that they're frankly, I mean, I would go even further. I would say, well, this is almost a traitorous idea.
Well, most Greek people, from what I understand, are against this. I mean, they were against the sending of four
No.
planes full of weapons to Ukraine way, way back, like 7, 8 months ago. They were very much against this, and the Mitsotakis government came close to collapse over that issue. But they let it settle down for 6, 7 months, and now the Mitsotakis government is back at it again to try and arm Ukraine. It's no surprise given the Mitsotakis family
Yeah.
and their
Mm.
close connections to the United States that this is
Yes.
happening. That should surprise no one.
Yes.
But there are neoliberal globalist elements of Greek society, and it's not I don't want to say it's a small minority. I would actually say
No.
it's a pretty strong minority, which comes up with the argument that, you know what, this is a great idea from Mitsotakis. This is a checkmate move to Russia and to Turkey, because the Russians provided what was it, S-300s or S-400s to Turkey. So there are a lot
Yeah.
of Greeks who have the idea that this is actually a checkmate move. This is Greece with the United States at their back, sticking it to Russia and to Turkey for Russia's betrayal of providing the
Mm.
and I believe it's the S-400, the S-400
Yes.
system to
Yes.
Turkey. So this is
Yes.
Greece's is retaliation and response to Russia's propping up of Erdogan and Turkey. And now the
Well,
U.S. is fully behind Greece, so they have the muscle to take
yeah.
on the Russians and the Turks.
Well, this is an incredibly bad argument. First of all, when the Russians supplied the S-400 system to Turkey, Turkey was not at war with Greece in the way that Ukraine is at war with Russia. So already we're talking about a completely different situation. Secondly, of course, the Russians would have some degree of control over those S-400 missiles if there'd been a confrontation between Greece and Turkey. Well, the Russians could have ensured that those S-400s might not be used against Greece. And besides, and this is the key point, had there been good relations between Greece and Russia, the Russians would almost certainly have tried to act as a restraining force on Turkey. They would have come along to Erdogan and said, look, leave the Greeks alone. You have no interests there. We oppose you on this. We have a stranglehold over your economy. We showed that in 2015. We could do it much more so now. Don't even think of going there. So that's not the situation with Greece. I mean, if Greece supplies weapons, S-300s, Russian weapons to Ukraine to fight Russia, not only is that far more of a betrayal, I mean, an actual betrayal, especially given that we've given legal undertakings that we wouldn't do it. I mean, not only would it be a um, much more of a betrayal and seen as such in Moscow, but of course, it would, in effect, decide any argument in Moscow. Do we maintain some kind of balance between the Greeks and the Turks? Do we try to preserve our traditional friendship with Greece, or do we opt fully for Turkey? And I can't see why Russia opting fully for Turkey is in the interests of Greece, particularly given that supplying one S-300 system to Ukraine isn't going to make any difference. It's not going to change the situation in the war. And if Ukraine loses, Greece will be left hanging out to dry.
Well, That's the point to all of this, is that the S-300 is not going to make a difference. But
No.
what it does do is that it cements Greece's fate vis-a-vis Russia. Ever since
Yeah.
Pyatt, who was the
Yeah.
ambassador in Ukraine during Maidan, ever since he became ambassador to Athens after Ukraine, that's where Pyatt went. After the Maidan in Ukraine, he was transferred to be ambassador, U.S. ambassador in Athens. Ever since he became ambassador, we've seen year over year Greece being
Pulled. Yeah.
pulled away from any type of diplomatic relations with Russia. And I think that the main goal of this S-300 deployment to Ukraine is not so much the fact that this is going to make a difference. I think it's the final nail in the coffin between Greek-Russian diplomatic relations,
Yeah.
which, if there were to be a rapprochement, would take decades upon decades to happen. And you can also, and then you tie in all the damage that has been done to the Orthodox Church, and how the Greek Orthodox Church took a very aggressive position towards the Russian Orthodox Church with Ukraine as well, and everything that happened there. And you start to understand that this is more about, moving Greece 100% into the camp of the U.S., like 100%, without any
Absolutely.
room to
To
have any
maneuver.
type of diplomatic relations with Russia, any maneuver room with Russia going forward in the future, regardless of the government. Because Mitsotakis is here tomorrow, he's here today, he's gone tomorrow. Syriza could be back in power, but they're not going to have any
Oh no, absolutely. Yeah.
any chance for a rapprochement with Russia either. So I mean, that's what this is really all about. And why should Russia consider Greece's position vis-a-vis Turkey when it looks like Greece is not considering Russia's position vis-a-vis Ukraine?
Well, I agree again with every single point you've made. And as I said, if I was Pyatt, Jeffrey Pyatt, I would regard this as a huge success. I mean, you've achieved your purpose. You have destroyed relations between Russia and Greece, which were formerly quite close. In fact, they were very close. And you've committed Greece fully to the Western camp against the wishes of the Greek people. But, you don't care about that if you're Pyatt. So, yes, I could completely understand why someone like Pyatt would want to do this. And as you rightly say, the S-300 is not going to make any difference in Ukraine, but it is going to cement Greece in the NATO system and as an ally of the United States. I understand that. I understand where he's coming from. What my issue is not with Pyatt, it's with Greek leaders. And you're absolutely right, by the way. I've been listening to things that Tsipras has been saying recently, and Syriza, and there would be no difference in policy between a Tsipras government and a Mitsotakis government over this issue. Why would Greeks want to do that? Why would Greek political leaders want to sacrifice Greece's very long-standing and very emotionally deep relations with Russia, which have important geopolitical rationalizations for Greece, given our difficult relationship with Turkey and with potentially with some of our northern neighbors? Why would you sacrifice all of that? Because, of course, the United States and Jeffrey Pyatt and all those people want you to do that. Now, I can think of all kinds of reasons, and of course, you're going to tell me what those are, I'm sure, because, well, we can both say, I mean, that this is a political class which is totally integrated into the Western systems. But all I'm saying is, what they're doing is contrary to Greek national interests, and if they do it, it proves, I think, beyond any remaining shadow of a doubt. I mean, if anybody had much doubt, I don't think many people in Greece do anymore, by the way. It proves beyond any remaining shadow of a doubt that the Greek political class does not serve Greek national interests. It serves the national interests of other powers, other forces in Washington, in Brussels, and elsewhere.
As it always has.
As it always has, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
At least in
The
my
game
lifetime.
changer in all of this, yeah. Yeah, as it always has. The game changer in all of this to me is, on a final note, is the rapprochement between Russia and Turkey. That is the
Absolutely
part that unfortunately seems the Greek leadership is not taking seriously.
correct.
And that's going to
Yeah,
come back and hurt Greece in a big, big way.
it will indeed. And
I
of
hope
course,
not. I hope
well, I hope
not.
not
But
as well, because of course, and if any Russians are following this, which they probably are, I'm talking about Russian people. I'm not talking about policymakers. Just to repeat again, I don't think this is a popular move in Greece. In fact, we're sure it's not. I mean, it's not something over which Greeks in the majority have any choice. We have no part of this. It's quite clear that our political class is acting in its own interests, not ours.
anyway, we'll leave it there. The Duran.locals.com. And we are on Rockfin as well. And go to Duran Shop. 10% off. Use the code. Good day. Take care.